Hi, everyone. My name is Ahmed Medien, and I am your first speaker today at this symposium on disinformation, the state of global affairs and diplomacy. Before I start my talk, I'd like to thank the TNGO team for inviting me and for organizing this event. I also would like to hint that there are more than 10 sessions today, panels, workshops, lightning talk that you can connect with. I wish you a great day ahead.
Like I said in the first segment, my name is Ahmed. I run my own consultancy small business in how to include citizens, or rather informed citizen input in decision-making and policies that relate to content governance online. My work and talk today will address user empowerment principles, which include the phrase in the title of this talk, citizen science. But what is that? I will talk about that. Today, the general direction of my talk will be about the subject of disinformation, how we can, as citizens and users of the internet, professionals, and thought leaders, curb the challenges of disinformation and improve the credibility of information ecosystems we all participate in. I will also talk about new initiatives and new ideas on how to converge science and people thinking, or what we call collective intelligence, for policymaking and new innovations in democratic governance. My talk in the project I ran in the past called The Citizens Dialogue will focus on governing of digital platforms. You can learn about my work and my other projects on my website, axm.events.
I prepared a little presentation today, and we'll go through it, and I will talk about disinformation, and then I will talk about citizen science. First, like I said, this is who I am. This is the work that I do. You're welcome to look at it or go onto my website. Let's start. So, what is disinformation? And to start, I really wanted to go to Dali and try to picture an image that is both a mix between physical objects and an abstract notion of what we think disinformation is. I put the prompt in the slide so you can copy it or you can create your own prompt. But my thinking was disinformation is more so a car jam, a convoluted ideas, people in different lanes, people who are going in different directions, and perhaps also neuropaths and signals that are moving too fast. All of that perhaps is what disinformation is. If someone were to put it into a painting, perhaps that would be that. Perhaps I would paint that. Now let's talk about disinformation as a science. If I were to speak about my own foray into the subject, it was entirely mathematical. I wrote about disinformation in public health emergency supply chains. If I were to speak about my own foray into the subject, it was entirely mathematical. So, yes, much like this picture, disinformation is a wicked and puzzling informational challenge. But could we put a cost on disinformation? Well, if I were to speak about my own foray into the subject, yes, it was entirely mathematical. I wrote about disinformation in public health emergency supply chains in my master thesis, and the questions that I looked into were basically, what are the return investments on a good public health communication campaign? The question in my thesis were, could we actually put a dollar figure on that? How good a health communication campaign can be? Who are the actors in measuring a successful public health communication campaign? What are the challenges or obstacles? What is the medium? What are the artifacts? What are the shared trust signals and factors between the messenger and the receiver of the message? Can we mathematically put a dollar figure on both the spending equation or the cost saving equation? Can we save money while improving people's health outcomes? This required answers for many of these questions that I came up with, but oftentimes there wasn't a definitive answer for. Now the equation in the slide is completely fictional. I went to ChatGPT and I put in a few prompts and I asked what could be the return on investment in a good health communication campaign. As you can see, it's very vague. It does not mention disinformation, but disinformation is one of the key obstacles to actually getting the message across. I think now it's fair to say that our response to the mega spread of disinformation and misinformation, since it entered our common vocabulary in the past decades, has had its ebbs and flows. And unfortunately, we're not reaping any benefits from the hyper awareness of what this phenomena is. And many actors continue to create, contribute to what is a very polluted information and digital space that we all partake in. And unfortunately, our collective inability to really draw a shared definition of what is this problem has led to the very precarious global state of diminished peace, diminished social peace, and a state of warfare often present online as much as offline. In the next slides, I'm going to talk about definitions, and I think it's very important to talk about the definitions and the differences and the intersections between what we know as misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. So yes, let's continue with some definitions. As you can see here, I drew a Venn diagram of misinformation, malinformation, and disinformation. These are often lumped together, what is known as MDM, but they differ slightly in their intersections, and they have some commonalities. Their differences amount to very specific categories, which are actors, the content format, how is the misinformation or disinformation displayed, the frequency of the sharer, the platform often, the monetization goals behind the campaign, who is the audience, does the speech target any vulnerable group, and the call to action, what is the content asking you to do? So to dig into through all of this, let's go through some definitions. Misinformation refers to false or inaccurate information that is spread without the intent to mislead, or so to speak. It is often the result of a misunderstanding or a mistake, such as sharing an article with incorrect facts without knowing they are wrong. Think perhaps of what we colloquially or jokingly think of older family members or people who are often uninformed on a subject and they feel like they want to participate. Misinformation can spread rapidly, and often it is very much on fire on social media. The harm here can be somewhat mitigated if the spreaders of misinformation are corrected and they retract or correct the false information. And here you may think maybe you have a role to play. Disinformation, on the other hand, is false information shared deliberately and created and disseminated with the intent to deceive and manipulate public opinion or obscure the truth. This is more of an insidious form, and it has been used as a tool in political campaigns, propaganda, and by various actors seeking to advance specific agendas. The intent behind disinformation is what sets it apart from misinformation, and it is also what makes it more dangerous. It is designed to exploit cognitive biases and create divisions. Malinformation is based on reality, but is often used maliciously to mislead the public or create a state of confusion. Malinformation is often intermixed with misinformation, oftentimes information that is shared without the full context to fully help you understand what are the facts or the sources or the credibility behind the information that you're reading or listening to. For example, releasing doctored videos or out of context information to damage reputations can be considered malinformation. Oftentimes, when you look on the internet, there are a wide range or wide array of websites, science websites on a particular subject, say vaccines. Some of those websites may pretend to tell you the truth, but often omit some of the truth. The interplay among these terms manifests in the challenge of creating a unified response to the threat they pose. Mis, dis, and malinformation can in fact be a part of a coordinated strategy, all of them three together, where actors use a mixture of these types of false and misleading information to achieve a desired outcome. Misinformation can gradually erode trust in factual discourse and deepen societal divisions. Without a clear consensus of what constitutes harmful information and how to address it, efforts can be fragmented, and this fragmentation not only impedes the fight against the mega spread of misleading information, but also contributes to a global state of diminished peace. By the way, everyone, I said the words truth, trust, and maybe transparency, but I think they are very enigmatic words and they mean different things to different people. Truth, according to whom, and what lived story or history. Trust is certainly earned and not an easily or tangibly obtained value. Transparency may be an overall positive practice, but you can always find gaps in any measure that seeks to address information integrity challenges. Transparency reporting measures, for instance, on digital platforms have become more standardized over time. But you may ask to what end? If you read into the Digital Services Act articles, the transparency reporting mandate is largely for informational purposes, and the numbers are retrospective and historical rather than of the now or the future. What transparency really is at the end of the day is information. Knowledge is power, but only if you really have a medium to exercise that power. Which may take us now directly onto the next portion of this talk on citizen science, but there are a few more things I would like to say. Actually, if you look at this DALI picture that I created with just transparency reporting, you'll see many pie charts. And a lot of times we associate pie charts with visualization and data visualization. But the funny anecdote is humans are less skilled at measuring surfaces and areas and angles, and much more adept at measuring numbers with length or measuring reporting with length than bar charts. And even if this is just a DALI picture with just a simple prompt, you can see that maybe we don't all agree on what is the right visualization for the data that we're looking for, or maybe the information that we're often presented with is not always very useful or intuitive. Some final notes I would like to add to this topic is disinformation is truly a wicked problem. It is an insidious problem, and if you think globally, disinformation is not just disinforming content, what people associate most with bad and ill-intentioned spread of false information. It is also an information warfare offensive tactic. It plays for long-term objectives to destabilize, destroy, erode. What we see today in our discourse around government accountability or conversations around economic fairness, equity, or equality, or even immigration and migration is not radically different than 9, 10, or 11 years ago. However, our ability to detect these narratives or counter these narratives has weakened, on the other hand. I would also like to add this thought, which is really what I've learned personally from organizing and putting together 10 different symposia on the polarization of speech online and the credibility of information online and online platforms. If you do wake up one day and feel some form of moral awakening to contribute to this conundrum of a problem, quite frankly, that might not be the best approach. Instead, find people or communities or even friends and family with divergent views than yours and try to find the commonalities between your facts and their facts. Start small and then move to higher stakes conversations or even bigger communities. Now, since many of you in the audience, I assume, are still students, I want to play a talk from you from a science conference I organized at the US National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine in Washington, D.C. 4 years ago. The talk is how to embed media literacy and science in college curricula. But while this talk may be also for educators, I think we'll learn from it. The following talk is from the director of the News Collab Initiative at the Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University, Christy Roska.
Thank you, Ahmed. I'm going to set my timer. So as Ahmed said, my name is Christy Roschke, and I'm at the Arizona State University Journalism School, where I teach and I research media literacy. And I'm going to talk to you today about why we should be embedding digital media literacy into science education. And I'm really grateful for the previous presentation, because it queued up a lot of the things that I'm going to say. So just remember all of that, and then we'll carry on. So starting with some good news, recent research would indicate that trust in scientists is up. So relative to other types of professionals and other institutions, Americans generally think that scientists act in the public interest. But that's kind of that story of like, I trust my local scientist, but maybe my trust in science as an institution isn't quite as strong. So we've seen a lot of instances where there's a growing distrust in certain areas of science, and some of them have already been mentioned and will be mentioned later today. So there's this dichotomy between I trust scientists, but I'm not so sure about some scientific topics. And I think part of that reason is because there is just so much information out there. People are very confused. It's a stressful environment to be in. So if you're like me and you avoid your news notifications for days on end, you open your phone and your lock screen looks a little bit like this. And those green arrows for me indicate last weekend. Those are stories from just 2 news outlets about the coronavirus over a span of a day. So these are trusted news outlets with trusted stories, but just the amount of information is incredibly overwhelming, before we even start talking about the proliferation of misinformation and disinformation and the really bad stuff that's out there. So we really shouldn't be surprised that we're all very confused about where to go for information. There's just so much out there. And I've been very happy to see the platforms taking efforts with the coronavirus information and partnering with people like WHO and the CDC to say, if you are going to search for coronavirus, you're going to get this box that says, for trustworthy information, go here to the CDC and you can see the latest. But when I searched the coronavirus hashtag a couple of days ago, I got that box, which is very encouraging. And then right underneath it is a conspiracy theory about how coronavirus was originated in a lab. So this juxtaposition of credible information and not credible information happens to us all the time. And I think we all generally understand that our emotions often get the better of us. And yeah, I could go check out the CDC, but I could also check out this conspiracy theory, so maybe I'm going to go and do that. So despite best efforts, we're going to live in a digital world where hoaxes and conspiracy theories, propaganda are going to proliferate. Even though people are saying that they're searching for reliable sources. So again, there's a dichotomy here between what people say that they want, which is credible, trustworthy information, and a lot of the information that they click on. So people are seeking out reliable sources, and this is a global survey that Edelman does each year on trust, and 73% of people are worried about false information. But behaviors are different from worry about misinformation, and so people are still gravitating to and tend to gravitate to mis and disinformation or overhyped information. And when we're talking about health and science in particular, this is not only, unfortunate and dangerous, it can have real ramifications on people's health. So when we talk about reliable sources and you see surveys like that, what is a reliable source to people? We assign credibility in different ways, and we attach it to different types of people. And a lot of people gravitate towards people with similar interests or shared views. We talked in the last presentation about pre-existing beliefs. So when you come into, say, a Facebook group with people that you believe that you can trust and you get bad, not professional information, it can have severe consequences, very unfortunate consequences. And a thing that concerns me is as we move away from, or we move closer to getting more information from things like smart speakers, and we're moving away from provenance and attribution as part of our, information system, and random people can provide Alexa answers to information. It just creates a situation where we're less attached to where the source of information comes from, and it creates more confusion and more problems. So, it's complicated. So media literacy is generally understood to be the ways in which people access, analyze, and interact with media. And this is a definition that I use and I really like for digital media literacy, which defines it as a set of social practices. So it's not a skill set that you learn when you're 5 or you're 12 or you're 25. It's an ongoing process throughout lifetime, and it's based on social circumstance, it's based on personal context, it's based on education and experience. And media literacy is about so much more than just verifying information. Certainly that's a big part of it, and certainly today that's the part that gets talked about most often. But when we talk about media literacy, we're really talking about how we engage with the information in our environment. And we can characterize that by collaboration and openness and interactivity around these conversations in a way that it can feel, when we're just looking at social media, like that's not happening. And what I like to present today is there's an opportunity in subject areas that aren't related to media, like science and health, to bridge subject matter and the related media environment around it. So I think we all typically understand, say, science classes to be where we go and learn scientific information from scientific sources, from science subject matter experts, and traditional popular media is typically not, it doesn't enter into that equation. And whether it's not seen as trustworthy or credible, or it's just not part of the conversation, I think that that's very unfortunate because it discounts the ways in which we're all interacting with information. Even those of us who are subject matter experts are still Googling things all the time. And that we're not talking about that in classrooms, I think, is a big missed opportunity. Recent research would indicate that young people do use news. And I think that this is relevant information for people that interact with young people of all ages, but in this presentation, I'm kind of specifically thinking of undergraduates. But more than 75% of US teens follow current events. And a project information literacy study that I found especially interesting shows that most college students are interacting and talking about news on a weekly basis. And most of that happens on digital and social platforms, but it also happens among peers, and it does happen in classrooms. This survey found that social sciences, English classrooms, history classrooms are more inclined to bring current events into the classroom than STEM subjects, though, which again I think is a missed opportunity because professors can model and demonstrate engagement with traditional media in a way that can be useful for students. And just a little bit more from that project information literacy study, it's, again, there's these dueling ideas that information and the amount of it can be very overwhelming, but our ability to use it via digital and social and to make it a social practice can also be very empowering. And I like to work with my students on sort of this empowerment side of it. Is how do we harness this information for conversation and to learn more and to sort of not act from a deficit model and not talk about the fear and the confusion, but rather to talk about how we can make it better. I teach a class on digital media literacy, and every semester I ask my students to track their media use for 24 hours, and I am astounded every time by their answers, and I've been doing this for about 6 or 7 years, and the answers have changed dramatically over 6 or 7 years. And so here's just a few of the icons of the most common responses. YouTube these days is far and away the place that they're at most, not only for entertainment purposes, but for news purposes. You'll see news aggregators, social platforms, and then some traditional media outlets there. There's also anecdotally an increase in students who are listening to podcasts. So this is super interesting to me because I don't use a lot of these platforms myself, and I'm a media instructor. So I use this as an opportunity to ask my students more questions. So you go to YouTube for news. What does that mean? Who's giving you this news on YouTube? Who are these people that are providing this information? And chances are, in a lot of cases, they're providing other people's information. So it's an opportunity to, do an exercise in sourcing. When the YouTube personality is talking about a big story that hit, where did that person get their information? So all kinds of conversations can abound on subjects related to science and health when you start to ask students about where they're finding their information. And I'd also like to point out that if we're operating in this world where I'm assuming you're getting information from someplace and you're actually getting it from someplace else, we're not having the same conversation. And until we can kind of address these gaps, we can't really get to the root of the problem. So again, a lot of attention these days around media literacy is around verification and whether or not we can determine a source is credible or if it's fake news, all of those words that we see in the media a lot. And I'm certainly not here to say that that's not important, because absolutely it is. It's part and parcel of media literacy. But I'd also like to point out that it's a practice, again, I said that, that begets participation and collaboration and evaluation in a way that doesn't just have to be, is this picture true or false? And for teachers, professors, parents who have different subject matter expertise, sometimes there's a reluctance to teach about media if you're not an expert in media, but you're an expert in your subject matter. And there's media about pretty much every scientific topic. So when you broach it from your subject area and you bring popular media into the classroom, you're not only making it more accessible to the students, but you're acknowledging and you're respecting that traditional news sources and information sources are really where we're getting a lot of our information. And though we would love our students to only access our library databases and read peer-reviewed scholarly journals, and surely we will assign those and continue to expect our students to read those and talk about them in class, that doesn't discount the popular media and the experience that they're experiencing outside your classroom. And it also doesn't change the fact that when you give them an assignment, they're going to Google it first. 100%, that's what they're going to do. So how do you help them find information in a Google search or a Wikipedia search that can lead you to the things that maybe you're, as an instructor, more comfortable with? And this should be happening in all classrooms. It's not just science and health or media or history. This can be a conversation that any professor, any teacher has with people at any time. And I think it really values the young people's media experience, values their experience when you ask them about their media use. So I think it's an important thing to be doing across the board. It's not just a singular subject area that should be relegated to its own class. And then the last kind of point I want to make is that, and this was said in the previous presentation a little bit too, subject matter knowledge doesn't necessarily increase trust in science, and it definitely doesn't equate the ability to find and use credible sources about a topic. If you've taken a Bio 101 class like I did in college, I may have learned about biology, but I definitely didn't learn about what trusted sources for biology subjects are. That was not what this class was about. And I think a conversation about what are those trusted institutions for information should come from science instructors. There was a lot of talk already today about consensus reports, which I think is fantastic. But who what lay audience understands what consensus reports really do, and which consensus report is trustworthy and which one is sponsored by a think tank that has alternative agendas. These conversations, I don't think, come up enough in science classes when we're talking about bias and funding and all those things that, can be good and bad about scientific discovery. As we're talking about the way that we create knowledge, we should also talk about the way that we create information. Those things are like inextricable from one another. So I would implore everyone in a position to sort of interrogate some of these questions in the classroom. Do typical people know how to find good consensus documents on things and understand what that means? Do they have access to quality information? And if not, how can you help them gain access? And then how do we evaluate scholarly research on a single study level, on a consensus level, on a trend level? And importantly, how do we then also examine the press coverage related to those scholarly journal articles and research, because sometimes there's problems there. These are things that can happen across a course, and you don't really have to put too much effort into them, I think, and I think they would engender a lot of really interesting conversation and help people have, just fine-tune their knowledge about the information that they consume. And something I do, I wouldn't expect you to be able to read these, but in my classroom we do a lot of discussion around this, and I have found both in my classroom anecdotal experience and in my research that the more people are talking about these issues, obviously the better their understanding. I think it kind of feels like common sense, but it is a practice and we must practice it to have a better understanding. And these are just examples of students talking to each other. They don't have to talk to you. They can make sense of these things through conversation with each other, scaffolded by a conversation in the classroom. So we have lots of tools and tips that on how to help students with credibility and find good sources on our website if that's of interest to you. And you can follow us and me on Twitter, and happy to have you reach out if you'd like more information. Thank you.
Welcome back. I really hope you enjoyed that video and you learned from it. Now to the second portion of my talk today, citizen science. I haven't really dealt a lot with the definition of citizen science, but I looked on Wikipedia and it says, citizen science is something akin to community science, crowdsourced science, civic science, participatory monitoring, or volunteer monitoring of research. I also Googled citizen science, and now unfortunately my search page is probably geo-specific, but you may be interested to know that the US government, the EU, Canada, and even science government agencies like NASA have their own dedicated citizen science portal. What is strange though is you might think, how can the general public, if we really admit that they come from very different backgrounds, very different strands, or listen to very different information ecosystem because of disinformation, how can they all contribute equally, or at least productively, or come together with a scientifically conclusive idea? How could that be? And what is the science behind that? Now, if you link citizen science and disinformation, think about this. If you pair complex problems such as disinformation or war and peace and citizen science, this equation might not math out at first glance, but several new technologies, specifically new generative technologies, such as what we call generative foundational models, can help us with this problem. Think, for example, of DALL-E and Midjourney. Now, I've used DALL-E throughout the presentation, right? These two technologies are perfectly capable of creating new arts, or more radically, actually, human-looking persons with specific demographic traits such as age, skin color, physical appearance, and even gender. The idea here, that the input may be radically different or marginally different, i.e. what people are saying, there may be still a chance to extract valuable input and information while maintaining or achieving this radical inclusion, which doesn't often happen naturally, and especially when it comes to disinformation and speech online. We don't really ask every person what do they think of how we should govern content online, right? The how you achieve the outcome may be the new worthy undertaking of social scientists and social computational scientists, and looking into the advantages or the promise of citizen science may be the new discipline this year or for the next few years. For me, I'm going to talk to you today about a similar experience I ran, which is a citizen dialogue in the country of Tunisia in North Africa on the topics of the governance of internet infrastructure, artificial intelligence, and new technologies in general, and especially the governance of speech online, including misinformation and dissenting political speech. The Citizen Dialogue was a global initiative undertaken by 6+ countries and many organizations in many languages. I ran this dialogue in Arabic and French. And the complexity here, for example, these languages, or when you compare them with English, they don't often translate equally. So some of the terms in English may not translate equally in Arabic and may not have the same meaning in Arabic. So there's that added complexity there. The video they will see today is one summary of some of these projects and these dialogues that took place in some of the participating countries.
inspiring.
عطيها لون.
Успешно.
التجربة كانت مميزة ومعلومات مثيرة.
بهترين.
كلاس.
Importante.
Éberségre intő.
Lehrreich.
Разнообразно.
ذات بوي.
Muchas gracias.
Merci.
Ça fait 3 ans qu'on y travaille et aujourd'hui c'est le jour où ça se passe dans le monde entier, donc beaucoup de bonheur.
Мне нравится, что пришли участники, которые действительно готовы поделиться своим мнением и услышать мнение оппонентов.
I actually enjoyed it. I really liked how it was conducted.
Vừa đưa cho mình thêm rất là nhiều kiến thức mới.
Nagyon jó videókat néztünk meg.
شخصيات داخل وصار عصف ذهني وأخذت أكبر كمية من المعلومات.
He experimentado esto de una forma genial.
मुख्तलिफ कारहाई ज़िंदगी और शोबों से ताल्लुक़ रखने वाले लोग यहाँ पर आए, उनसे मैं मिला, उनकी राय जब मैंने जानी.
La verdad me dio un poco de curiosidad aprender más sobre lo que es el mundo del internet.
So it's been a very good experience. We have got a lot to learn, but we have also got a lot of take homes that we should take out there and change the world for the better.
И я уверен, что это принесет пользу в развитии интернета.
Tôi cảm thấy tự tin hơn về chủ đề Internet. Tôi sẽ mong muốn được lan tỏa các cái kiến thức này đến cho nhiều người.
Ich habe heute beim Bürgerdialog teilgenommen, weil ich mehr darüber erfahren wollte, was mit meinen Daten passiert, wie sie verarbeitet werden und wie ich Einfluss darauf nehmen kann.
I've got to know people's experiences on overuse of internet, indulgence and being socially recluse.
То есть это разные точки зрения, которые помогают нам как-то агрегировать наши знания и в дальнейшем с пользой их применить.
तो डिबेट वो वाइड सोर्स है जहाँ पे अगर हमारे यूथ को स्पेसिफिकली पेशावर की यूथ को अगर कोई क्वेश्चंस है या फिर कोई भी कंफ्यूजन है.
And I'm so glad that we are discussing these issues because they impact everyone.
Este diálogo me ha servido mucho porque he podido implementar nuevas estrategias, ideas que no solamente son de mí, sino de todos.
Nous avons fait plusieurs points de recommandation. La qualité du réseau. Nous avons dénoncé la cherté d'accès à ce réseau.
Este internet no lo usamos a como debería de ser y esto es preocupante para el mundo.
इंटरनेट के फ्यूचर के बारे में मैं काफ़ी कॉन्फिडेंट हूँ क्योंकि ये हमारे लोगों के लिए कन्वीनियंस का बायस बनेगा.
Még ezt követnek is mindenhova, és mindent tudnak rólunk.
Nous croyons que demain sera fait d'un lendemain meilleur. L'internet va être régulé.
Ich sehe die Zukunft des Internets sowohl als Fluch und Segen zugleich.
The internet is not that bad.
I'm both confident and afraid, to be honest.
Хотелось бы чувствовать себя как в безопасном пространстве, и я в это верю.
Ich glaube, dass viel Schaden oder viel Chance damit angerichtet werden kann.
Нужно немножко сменить точку зрения, точнее обзор, с которого мы смотрим.
Que sean un poco más responsables en el aspecto de la seguridad a las cuentas de las redes sociales que tenemos.
It should be a safe place for every individual to voice out their opinion.
Il faut qu'on essaye de protéger un peu l'humain.
Whether it's psychology, whether it's engineering, whether it's law, we need to be as inclusive as possible so that we can get the best results, the best laws, the best regulations, and the right rules in place to protect everyone.
Szeretném, ha nyugodtan az internetnek köszönhetően nyugodtan élhetnénk a mindennapjainkat.
J'aime à ce que l'internet soit accessible vraiment au chat.
حابين انه يكون يعني سرعة فائقة وقلة في السعر طبعا.
Это очень важно, и я бы посоветовал регулярно устраивать подобные дебаты для того, чтобы знать мнение пользователей сети.
Now let's go back to DALL-E. I love DALL-E. Let's talk about generative foundational models. As you can see here, as you can see from the video, these images are a bit different, right? In the DALL-E picture, when I put in the prompt citizen dialogue, they produced a jury or a panel talking at an audience. A citizen dialogue is rather people talking to people. You talk to people, you speak with people, you deliberate with people. People do not talk at you, do not speak at you. So because there isn't really much detail on how to organize a dialogue of hundreds of people on the same day or how that can take place, I'm actually going to tell you in this talk the steps of how I did it with a team of 2 exceptional project managers and dozens of volunteers. The foundation of a citizen dialogue is at first a large base of participants, which is only achieved through digital advertising if you want to be cost efficient about it. You can also print out flyers, you can go and talk to people, but today in an online world, the most easy way is to do it via digital advertising. This is the most costly and hard to maneuver or ethically perhaps questionable part when designing who are you going to target in your methodology for bringing in participants. In fact, as you may know, participatory or observational social science studies at university often require an ethical assessment. In addition to ethical standards, let's go back to digital advertising. Digital advertising may be costly in some locations because you're essentially competing for digital real estate, much like any other business, big or small, retail, cinemas, etc. This one is one of your largest cost centers when running similar projects. Similarly, even if you use different types of communications and pull in campaigns or tactics or other mediums, it may be as costly and possibly less effective. Now, inadvertently, digital platforms have been disallowed from using hyper-targeted techniques based on demographic profiles due to privacy legislation like GDPR. So the truth is, you have to approximate demographic groups with other niche subjects such as sports, professions, universities, regions, favorite shows, artists, etc. This one can get a bit tricky. We had to do this, and we attracted several hundred participants, albeit at a relatively hefty cost, which was several dollars per sign-up. This is expensive. I want to talk about inclusion here and the science behind this practice. Here, the participants really have to represent your larger populations. So we went directly to talk with community organizations representing other participants, for instance, participants with disabilities. The other foundation of this project is that deliberation or the crowdsourcing aspect must happen simultaneously and not layered, so that you guarantee that the participants' opinions are in their true forms. But wait, there is no way really to gauge that or measure that. So what we did is we asked people to fill out the surveys on the same questions of the debate and the dialogue before they started. And we measured for any radical differences in outliers. The logistic of the educational parts here and the deliberation is that you have to also train a large number of moderators, facilitators, and volunteers so that you can truly achieve 20, 30, 40 small groups and small conversation circles happening all at the same time. You don't really want the layered debates. You don't want people to influence other people. The results of the project that I ran of the citizen dialogue in Tunisia is in a report which is on my website, which is easily accessible. A major note there, we do not have access to the foundational models that are widely available today. And they are truly a new innovative way to conduct these dialogues. Machine learning algorithms and applications can pull out new ideas from existing ones. We simply computed percentages and monitored for causalities and contradictions, and the results were extremely full of contradiction, as you may imagine, because human beings are truly complex, because the social cues around us and the signals around us and the pull factors are constant and ubiquitous. In another word, and with additional resources, machine learning technology and generally generative foundational models can have a transformational addition to this type of community consultation and leadership in many ways. Some of this is perhaps data collection at scale. While I was only able to attract 600 participants at large, not all of them actually filled out the surveys. Machine learning algorithm can really visualize and showcase this data collection in its large numbers. One of the primary benefits of data collection at scale is the ability to provide a comprehensive picture of the information ecosystem. For instance, if you intersect that with disinformation by analyzing large data sets and what people think, researchers can detect coordinated campaigns of disinformation or even benign narratives. People tell us what they are and they tell us in great numbers, so we know what they think. The intersection of large data collection at scale with misinformation and disinformation lies in the ability to detect and understand the mechanism behind false information campaigns and how they propagate. The other benefit here from machine learning algorithm is enhancing the prudence and democratic legitimacy of these community consultation projects. We really want to go large, we really want to go big, and we really want to see everything. And by seeing everything, by including everyone, we establish a larger, a more legitimate citizen dialogue or debate. This can include several factors. Some of it including transparency in decision-making, accountability for errors, and inclusivity in considering diverse viewpoints. When users understand the rationale behind content moderation decisions and feel that their voices are heard in the process, they are more likely to trust the outcome. One big addition here for specifically platforms and regulators and not just citizens running these consultation projects is that this large amount of data as presented to them will help them navigate gray areas more carefully, perhaps establishing more clear and transparent policies on how to engage in these dialogues with their communities. And for instance, when looking at the results, instead of weighing majority opinions, 50% plus against less than 50% less, we can look at new ideas. We craft new responses and new legislative responses to the spread of misinformation or hate speech via these generative foundational models. And we can process larger and bigger data sets of diverse input on public opinion and behavioral patterns. These models can forecast the impact of proposed regulation on speech and information dissemination, and they have the capacity to help us assess the efficacy and the potential unintended consequences. These new technologies are going to have a tremendous impact on how we collectively make decisions in the future. Now, to end my talk, I really want to share with you some of the platforms that I find very useful. I really admire their work. I like the work, for instance, of howtobuild.org, which does tremendous work in the space of digital peace building. Zooniverse.org carries a trove of citizen data for all kinds of projects. And Participedia is a platform for citizen-led and citizen participatory projects for you to join in or propose your own projects. This is now the concluding segment for my talk. I thank you for paying attention. In the different segments of my talk earlier, I spoke about how multifaceted and how multi-definitional the problem that disinformation is. I am only one individual who chose to spend my time to create these engagement platforms for citizens and experts to create new knowledge, new ideas, and new research on the subject, and bring people from different backgrounds to the same physical spaces. But you can also do your part too. I hope you were inspired by this talk. If you want to get in touch with me or ask me questions, my website is axm.events. Bye for now.